In this presentation discussing themes relevant to the Voice to Parliament referendum, I'd like to discuss two argument structures. Now, these argument structures could be applied in a number of contexts, but the context that I'm thinking about is the life outcomes of Indigenous Australians. On average, life outcomes for Indigenous Australians are lower than the average Australian life outcomes. Things like educational attainment and overall health are often lower than average Australians, and many Australians think something should be done about that to try and increase the quality of life of Indigenous Australians. So, as I say, these two arguments can be applied in a number of contexts, but I'll think about them in terms of life outcomes. Many Australians think something should be done to help improve outcomes of Indigenous Australians. And voting in the referendum on the Voice to Parliament may do something to improve our life outcomes for Indigenous Australians. But it may not. So the question becomes, well, one form of argument is that we should do the appropriate thing. Many people think that perhaps voting yes in the referendum will improve the life outcomes of Indigenous Australians. Other people think that it won't. So the first way of thinking about this question is in terms of the perhaps obvious observation that we should do the appropriate thing. An argument of that form might follow this structure. We should do something. This is the appropriate thing to do. Therefore, we should do this. So people of goodwill on both sides of this debate might agree that this is the argument structure that they are following. They might disagree on what the appropriate thing to do is, but they might all agree on this argument structure. So whether you decide to vote yes or whether you decide to vote no, you could be following the argument structure. We should do something. This is the appropriate thing to do. Therefore, we should do this. But what I want to do today is draw our attention to a different argument structure. And notice that it's motivated by goodwill. Perhaps many people think that we should do something in terms of the life outcomes of Indigenous Australians. So notice that there's a sort of a common concern that we should do something. But there's a danger that there's an argument structure lurking here that's not as useful. We should do something. This is something. Therefore, we should do this. So notice that both of these two argument structures share a premise, we should do something. And in one argument, we identify the appropriate thing to do and then do it. But in the other form of argument, perhaps with very good will, we want to do something, and this is something, therefore we should do this. Both arguments are motivated by goodwill, but only one argument identifies the appropriate thing to do as opposed to all the possible things we could do. So doing something is good in the sense when you pick out the appropriate thing to do, but doing something is not necessarily useful if it's just one of the things that we could be doing. So when you reflect upon your own position, you could ask the question of yourself, what argument structure characterises my position? Is it that I've picked out the appropriate thing to do and therefore I'm doing that? Or is it that you perhaps are motivated by the motivation that we need to do something, and so this is something we could do? I leave you with the invitation to reflect upon which argument structure best characterises your position.